I was at dinner with a few friends recently. One of them runs a sizable company, and somewhere between the third drink and the main course, he started, and I want to use the precise word here, ranting about Gen Z employees. He used interesting adjectives like untrainable, casual, unskilled, indisciplined, and they show up when they feel like it, leave when it doesn't align with their energy, spend half the day on their phones and the other half explaining why the phone usage was actually necessary for their mental health. Now, this guy is a very good friend of mine, and he is right about most of the things. A great person to take advice from, but I think it was because of the three drinks that I was unexpectedly defending Gen Z. I said, look, they follow their heart. They take seriously the things they are genuinely passionate about. They are not lazy. They are just selective about what they give their energy to. And this is my genuine observation. I can be wrong though. Now, this friend of mine looked at me the way people look at someone who has said something they find both incorrect and slightly annoying. He said, nope, they are just lazy. And I sat there. I thought about it. And I realized I had heard this before. Not recently, a long time ago. My father used to say the same about my generation, the millennials. He used to say we were lazy. We didn't know the value of hard work, and that when he was my age, he had worked two jobs while studying, two jobs simultaneously while attending college. While millennials were complaining about assignment deadlines with the energy of people who had never encountered real difficulty. We were, in his assessment, the laziest generation that had ever existed. And his father, that means my grandfather, who has been gone a long time ago, long enough that I can only reconstruct his arguments from the stories my father tells about them. My grandfather used to say that my father's generation was lazy because my grandfather's generation had walked barefoot to school, crossed three rivers and two jungles, fought crocodiles and killed tigers on the way, just for fun. That generation had seen partition, the time when men went wilder than wild animals. They feared nothing, but the point is three generations, same diagnosis, different defendants. My friend about Gen Z, my father about us, my grandfather about my father. All completely certain, all using the word lazy, all describing a generation that was, in their view, the softest, least serious, most entitled generation that had ever had the misfortune of being born. Which made me wonder, is Gen Z actually the worst generation ever? Or is every generation simply the worst generation that has ever existed, as seen from the one that came before it? Turns out this isn't new. This isn't even recent. This is possibly the single oldest recorded human complaint in existence. Around 700 BC, which I want you to appreciate is a very long time ago, before most of the things your father thinks were better had been invented. A Greek poet named Hesiod sat down and wrote what is essentially the world's first published complaint about how much better things used to be. He described human history as five ages: gold, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. The Golden Age. Perfect. Humans lived like gods, no labor, no suffering, no disease, no decay. People were just fine, inexplicably, continuously fine, eating fruits that fell from trees, sleeping well, dying peacefully when they got old. I don't know what the average life expectancy was back then, but I'm sure it could not have been more than 30. But the Golden Age was the ancient Greek version of a government schemes that actually worked. And then it got worse. Silver Age, slightly less good. Bronze, worse again. Heroic, complicated, lots of war, but also heroes, so mixed reviews. And then came Iron, which is where Hesiod was writing from. The absolute worst. Moral decay, no respect for parents, no justice, no shame. The gods had abandoned humanity. Everything valuable had already happened before he was born. Hesiod was, by all accounts, a serious and careful man, a genuine observer of the world around him. He was also writing during what historians now consider one of the most intellectually extraordinary centuries in Greek history, the period that produced the philosophical tradition that the entire Western world still runs on. He was surrounded by it, and yet he couldn't see it because he was inside it. My friend is inside it. My father was inside it. My grandfather, crossing his rivers, killing crocodiles and tigers, was inside it. And the thing about being inside something is that it looks exactly like the outside looks, which is to say, it looks like everything is getting worse. Because the thing you are inside always feels smaller than the thing you remember being outside of. Now, I want to be fair to my friend before I continue. The nostalgist's case, the argument that things genuinely were better, is not entirely without merit, and I think it deserves to be made properly before we complicate it. Some things actually were simpler before, not imagined simpler, actually simpler. Fewer choices, less noise, more physical community, people who lived near each other and saw each other daily and had relationships that weren't mediated by an algorithm deciding how much of each other's lives to show them based on engagement metrics. The pace was slower, not because people were less capable, but because the infrastructure of acceleration hadn't been built yet. You couldn't be reached at all times. You couldn't know about every crisis in every part of the world simultaneously. There was a natural limit to how much the world could demand from your attention in a single day. These are real things that existed. The person who misses them isn't deluded or sentimental. They are accurately remembering something that was genuinely there. So, point to the nostalgist. Things were different. Some of those differences were losses. And here's the complication. What the nostalgist is not accurately remembering, and this is the part that lends to produce a specific kind of silence when you say it out loud at dinner, is everything else about that time. The simplicity came with costs, such as fewer choices for women specifically, or for anyone who didn't belong to the dominant religion or caste or class group. The slower pace was considerably less relaxing if you were on the wrong side of the structure that maintained it. The golden age is almost always remembered by the people for whom it was golden. The people for whom it was not golden have a somewhat different set of memories about the same period. But their version of events tends to get filed under complaints rather than history. Hesiod was a free male Greek landowner describing a golden age. But the people working his land may have had different take. My grandfather, who walked barefoot to reach the school, he also lived in a time when a significant portion of the population was not even permitted to reach any. The barefoot heroism and the structural exclusion existed simultaneously. We remember one of them as a story about resilience, the other one we don't tell at dinner. Now, declinism. It's a cognitive bias, a real one, studied, documented with actual neuroscience behind it. The basic finding, and I am simplifying this, but accurately, it's that humans are wired to weight negative change more heavily than positive change. Loss registers harder than the gain. The thing that disappeared feels more significant, more real, more worth grieving than the thing that arrived to replace it, which means we are biologically predisposed to believe things are getting worse. Not because things are getting worse, because loss feels realer than discovery. You remember what you had, you discount what you gained. You construct a past that was coherent and warm and comprehensible. You construct a present that is fragmented and loud and slightly rude, and you call that history. Hesiod called it the Iron Age. My friend calls it Gen Z. Same cognitive architecture, different scroll format. There's also the small matter of what we actually remember. We don't remember the past. We remember our highlight reels of the past, edited with a filter, with the difficult parts quietly moved to a trash folder that nobody ever opens. The summer of your childhood that you remember as perfect, it also had heat waves coupled with power cuts. The inconvenience of going out in 40 degrees Celsius to get an ice cream. You remember the light through the window at a specific time of afternoon, but you don't remember the absence of air conditioners. The past didn't actually feel the way you remember it feeling. You felt it the way you feel the present. Complicated, incomplete, occasionally frustrating, with moments of brightness that you didn't recognize as brightness until later when you were looking back. The golden age looked like the iron age from the inside. It always does. Every generation has a version of this conversation. The boomers, who had jobs that paid enough to buy houses, who had pensions that actually existed, who had a certain kind of social stability that came from a world that changed slowly enough to feel navigable. They look at the present and see chaos and fragility and young people who don't know how to be uncomfortable without discussing it at length. The millennials who graduated into a financial crisis, who were told education was the path and then discovered the path had been sold. They look at the boomers and see people who pulled up the ladder and are now wondering why nobody's climbing. Gen Z, who grew up with the internet as their primary environment, who inherited the anxiety of a world that had decided their attention was a resource to be extracted. They look at everyone older and see people arguing about whose fault everything is while the house burns. And Generation Alpha, the ones currently in school, have apparently already ruined something. I'm not sure what yet, but I think the pieces are being written. Someone is already disappointed in them and they haven't even finished their primary school. Every generation is simultaneously the most disappointing thing to happen to the previous one and the last line of defense against the catastrophe that is definitely coming from the next one. It's a conveyor belt of mutual contempt that has been running without interruption since Hesiod was alive and my grandfather was, I don't know, counting wild animals. Now, here's the part I want to be honest about because I have just made the argument that nostalgia is a cognitive bias and the golden age is a neurological illusion and nobody's memories are reliable. And all of that is true. But some things are genuinely measurably worse. Loneliness. The data on this is not ambiguous. People report more of it. They have fewer close relationships. They spend more time in contact with more people and still feel more alone. Mental health, anxiety, and depression statistics have moved in a direction that cannot be entirely explained by better diagnosis or reduced stigma around reporting. Cost of living versus income. The specific calculation of what a single income could purchase in 1985 versus what it purchases now is not nostalgia, it's arithmetic. So the nostalgist is not entirely wrong. Some things are worse. The mistake is not noticing things are worse. The mistake is the explanation. Things didn't get worse because Gen Z is lazy. Things got worse because previous generations' solutions created new problems. which is Hegel's spiral again. I discussed it in my first video. The solution of the golden age are the problems of the iron age. Again, the solutions of the golden age are the problems of the iron age. Always. My friend's generation built the digital infrastructure that Gen Z grew up inside. The attention economy that makes his employees distracted was designed, scaled, and monetized by us. The crocodiles and tigers, in other words, did not appear from nowhere. Horace, a Roman poet, considerably more sardonic than Hesiod, which is perhaps why I find him more useful, coined a phrase around 20 BC. Laudator Temporis Acti. I don't know if my pronunciation was proper, but it means praiser of time past when he was a boy. He meant it as an insult, specifically aimed at older men who couldn't stop talking about how much better everything used to be, who had elevated their personal biography into historical analysis, who had confused I was young and the world felt built for me, with the world was actually better. Horace wrote this in 20 BC. My friend said it last Friday over dinner. 2000 years and not a single update. Here's what I actually think is happening. The golden age is not a time, it's an age, your age. The specific developmental age at which you were young enough that the world felt like it was built for you, moving at a pace you could follow, speaking a language you understood natively, rewarding the things you happened to be good at. Everyone had this age. Everyone loses it. And everyone loses it at approximately the same point when the world stops reorganizing itself around your comfort and starts requiring you to reorganize yourself around it. That transition feels like decline. It is not decline, it's just midweek, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the generation that comes of age after your Tuesday will be, without question, the laziest, least serious, most entitled generation that has ever existed. You will be certain of this, and you will be wrong. Horace had a word for you. Hesiod was you in 700 BC, and the crocodiles and tigers were probably not there at all. Now, before I end this video, I want to mention something. I write novels. I have written two, and here's something about publishing in 2026 that is itself a perfect generational complaint. Earlier, publishers used to read manuscript and decide if they were good. Now they look at your followers and subscribers and decide if you are worth reading. Whether that's better or worse depends entirely on which side of it you are on and when you arrived. If you have watched this far, please consider subscribing. Not because this generation of publishing is right, but because until someone changes it, this is the boulder we are pushing. Sisyphus had a boulder. I have a YouTube channel. We are both working with it. Now, Horace ended this observation about the praiser of time past with a question that I think was never been satisfactorily answered in the 2000 years since he asked it. If the past was so much better, why did it produce this? Not as an insult, as a genuine question. If the values were stronger, the communities tighter, the people more resilient, the culture richer, what went wrong? When exactly did the decline begin? And why does the answer to that question always turn out to be approximately 5 years before you were born? So that you just missed the good part. Every generation thinks it got it right because every generation experienced the world at its most comprehensible when they were young enough to comprehend it. That's, I don't think that's wisdom, that's timing. The golden age is always the age you were. The iron age is always now. Hesiod knew this. He just thought he was the exception. My friend is still certain about Gen Z. He'll say it again at the next dinner with the same conviction, possibly with new examples. And somewhere, a Gen Z employee at his company is going home tonight and telling his roommates about the completely untrainable, casual, out of touch, technologically illiterate generation above him that doesn't understand how anything actually works anymore. And they are both right about something, and they are both running the same program. And I have started noticing things about the generation below me. I haven't said it out loud yet, but I have thought it, which means the program has already started.